Hi, everybody. Got a shorter little intro there. How do you like it? My name is Sandy, and I'm with Ancestry, where the stories of Appalachia are. I'm really excited because our first guest is going to kick off our coal mining in Appalachia series for the entire month of May 2023. So if you're joining us live, thank you. And if you're joining us after the fact, thank you as well. If I could get everybody to click the thumbs up and like us, and also subscribe, because you don't want to miss any of the information that we're going to show this month. We've got great opportunity to talk about Appalachia and one of its main industries, coal mining. So let me go ahead and talk a little bit about what the subject is today. Today, we're starting off with mountaintop removal, the history and the impact of it. If you've had coal mining in your family, if you have driven through, let's say, southern West Virginia, different areas, you might have seen the top of a mountain removed. That would probably be mountaintop removal. And basically what they're doing is they're going to remove the surface of the mountaintop, and they're trying to get to the coal seam. And they have different ways of doing that. They can blast it, and they can scrape it. They can also push all the extra particles down into the valley, which gets into the streams. This is an extremely controversial topic. I realize that, and I want to be respectful to everybody out there. I know there are both sides to the story, and I also recognize, as a daughter and a granddaughter of coal miners, that a paycheck and food in your stomach is pretty important. But I also want to make sure everybody understands that the environmental impact of this is pretty important as well. To help me explain this a lot better than I ever could, we have a special guest here, and Dan Rademacher is here. He currently works for Appalachian Voices, a media specialist. He's worked over the years as an opinion journalist for Illinois, West Virginia, Florida, and Virginia. I came to know of him from a relative who said, check out his editorial page. Was editorial editor of the Charleston, West Virginia Gazette, and fought hard against this mountaintop removal mining in other areas of the mining industry. He's formerly a media consultant for Earth Justice, Resources Defense Council, Southern Environmental Law Center, and the Appalachian Mountain Advocates. So let's go ahead and welcome in Dan to the webcast. Hi, Dan. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Sandy. Thank you for having me.
I am really thrilled because you have been working on this topic, I think you just told me too, over 20 years.
Actually, I'm almost closer to 30. So, yeah.
So I couldn't think of a better person to come in to give us a lesson, really, because that's really what we're looking for, what we need, a lesson on what mountaintop removal is. And it's kind of a two-part, a full lesson, which is loaded information, and then the impact, which is where the controversy is probably going to come into this conversation. I want to mention that if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them as we go along. My producer is going to start them and make sure that we answer them before you leave the webcast. If we see something that we need to answer immediately, we will. But there's a lot of information put into this webcast. So let's go ahead and get started with what exactly is mountaintop removal. So I will let you explain it and educate us, Dan.
Sure. Well, you gave a pretty good overview. I mean, it's essentially what it sounds like. They get rid of the top of the mountain to get at the coal underneath. The way they do that is they rip out the forest, you bulldoze the trees, pull them out by the roots, and then they blast the rock underneath. They use these huge, they're called drag lines. They're like 10 stories tall, with buckets that really, even if you see them, they're hard to believe because they're just so big. I'm trying to remember, like, there's a number of school buses that you can fit in one of these buckets. That's how big they are. And
oh my gosh.
I can't remember the number, but they're just huge. And so all that, it's mountains blown apart. The what used to be a mountain is then bulldozed away or put into these drag lines, and then kind of dumped into the nearby valleys, creating what they call valley fills.
Well, why did they start this? Where was the idea? Hey, let's just chop off the mountaintop. And was it money? Was it easier?
There's kind of a maxim in the coal industry. You always mine the easiest coal first. So, when they first started mining, they got the big, thick seams that, they mined through traditional underground methods. And they would, then they moved to more mechanized approaches with long walls and things like that. And sometimes that involved cutting away the side of a mountain to get at the seam. But eventually they got to the point where what was left were really thin seams of coal, and they were kind of layered. So kind of think of a layer cake, like a 7-layer cake or more, with little thin strips of icing between the cake, and the little thin strips of icing is the coal. So trying to get at that through traditional methods, even with like long wall mining or anything, was really difficult and very expensive. Whereas if you just pull the top off the cake, scrape off the icing, then pull off the next layer, scrape off the icing, it was easier. It was just a massive ground moving operation, and the scale of it's kind of hard to imagine as well. But
I know that as I travel through different parts of Appalachia, a little bit of Virginia, in West Virginia, a little bit of Kentucky, it's shocking as you're driving down the interstate, and you all of a sudden you're enjoying the view. The view is great. You're seeing the valleys, you're seeing the mountains, and then all of a sudden, you keep driving. The mountaintop is just gone. It's erase, and there's no way really easily. I know that many have studied this to put it back or to do something with it. And we're going to talk a little bit about the environmental aspects and the social aspects to this in a few moments, because I think that's going to be what are the after effects and what are they doing to, I hate to use the word pretty, but to pretty it up. But we'll talk about that in a minute. But so they go in. How long of a time does it take them to go to the mountain, start it, removing the coal, and then leave the operation?
It's years, and because the mines are so big, and really, you can't get a good feel for it from the interstate. You might see something that's not there that should be. The best way I've found to see it is from the air, whether you're flying over, or if you can, get up in a helicopter or something. But even like on commercial flights, if you're flying over this part of the country, if you look down, you can see these just massive places where the mountains don't look like they should.
It's interesting to me because I put such an emotional and personal note to it when I see it, because I grew up. I was partly raised there, and I see that something is removed to never be put back. It was this beautiful greenery. It was a beautiful mountain. It is what Appalachia areas are known for. And it's just amazing to see it. So when I see it, my gut, it just hits me right there. There's no other way to, and I a lot of times get silent. I'm just like, oh, you see it, and it's just hard to believe, but it's a business, and it's still continuing.
Yes, it is business. It's not as lucrative as it used to be, I don't think, but it is. It's still a business, and it still employs, a lot of people, and that's something I always try to keep in mind when I'm doing the work I do and did. Is that like you said earlier, a paycheck is an important part of.
Yeah, it's tough. And I'm not going to suggest that Appalachia is poverty stricken, because that's part of the reason why we do these webcasts, is to change the narrative on Appalachia. But I'm not also going to deny that anybody would want a paycheck to keep a roof over their head and food for their family. So we were talking briefly beforehand. It's a tricky subject, because you do want to be respectful to those miners that are out there doing a job that obviously somebody's buying the coal,
Mm-hmm.
and they need the paycheck. But at the same time, it's heartbreaking to see what's done to an area of Appalachia that I know and love at the same time. Let me show a little bit too. So we've got a couple of video clips that are fascinating, and they'll really bring home what is done and what we're talking about. Because sometimes when you hear us talk about something, you're like, okay, Sandy, I get it. I understand. It's the whole mountain's taken off and you don't like it. But we've got some video clips to show you in a minute that really show what is done. Before I do that, though, these are actually pictures that came off of Appalachian Voices website where Dan works. And what they're doing in the top picture, they're exploding the mountaintop, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the bottom, I'm not sure if that's afterwards and they're just setting up their coal operation, their lines.
I can't tell from that picture that what stage they're at. That could be. Yeah, I can't tell from that picture.
And this describes also what you said, the thin seams of coal. And the part that got me when my producer put this slideshow deck together was the word ancient or mountain range. And you're not going to get that back. You're not in our lifetime, not in your grandkids' lifetime, not. Keep going, and you're still not going to get that back. So I wanted to show the picture before we did the videos. They're actually going in explosives and taking off the mountaintop so they can get to those thin seams. As Dan mentioned, the layers of the cake. And then you have this massive amounts of the dirt and the rubble. Not all of it's coal, because as you mentioned, you had that cake. You're trying to get to the icing. Mm-hmm. So not all of this is useful to a coal company. And we're going to talk about what happens with the environmental and social aspects of this. But it basically, all this runoff kind of mixes together and creates a coal slurry, which I call it slurry. I know some people call it sludge, but it's a mixture of, the dirt, the clay, the ground, the water, the coal dust, but it does also have some toxic metals into it as well. And keep in mind that people are also around this, not just people, but you've got the workers, the coal miners, and you also have the people that live around the area where the slurry is hitting. So let's go ahead and show the video. It's several little mini clips, but it gives you an idea of what we're talking about. The video does not have any music or any sound to it. So Dan, if you feel the need to describe something, or if you need the producer to pause to demonstrate something, feel free to let us know. At the very end, the very last clip of this video is where it gets really nice and green, and it shows the slurry. So if my producer will show the video. So this is actually after the fact and left alone. And I guess, let me pause this for a second. Let me go back real quick. So this, I think, is after the coal company has left. And it just, does the mountain just sit there usually?
No, there's a lot more. They are required to reclaim the mountain before they leave. And This does not look like it's
in that middle step. And then this is what the operation, it looks like. This is a little clip that was sped up a little bit. And you can tell by the trucks moving, but they're moving the coal.
Yeah, so this looks like the initial stages of processing, where they dump the coal, and then they spray it to try to keep down the dust, and then it moves down a conveyor belt for further processing.
And then let me pause this. And this would be after they left and after they have improved it, I guess.
Again, I mean, what happens? Like they wouldn't be allowed, or they shouldn't be allowed to leave like those the shear faces.
Yeah.
Those are called high walls, and they're supposed to get those to a better angle that's not as dangerous. And then they generally hydroseed, which is they just spray this mixture of water and different types of seed that grow quickly on pretty much anything. So you can usually tell when a coal company has moved on because it's got this like tall grassy kind of plateau.
Yeah, I was going to say it's flat. It's going to be
Yeah.
a plateau. And when they leave and they make it more flat or more plateau, they do the grass seed, then they're done. They don't need to come back to check to make sure that the grass took or anything like that.
Generally, in order to get when you do a big mine like this, you have to put up a reclamation bond.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to get that released, get your money back, then you've got to show that there's vegetation, that the high walls are gone. We could get, I don't know how much detail you want to get into, but like the regulations, what is supposed to happen has been very different from what actually happens as far as the cleaning up. What's supposed to happen is it's supposed to be put back in a way that it can meet a higher or better use than what it could before, or at least the same, put the same use. And that rarely happens. Usually they say they're reclaiming it as, grassland, which is not
a mountaintop.
Yeah, not a mountaintop, not an ancient forest, or yeah.
And do most people have access? The general public have access to the old roads up to these plateaus, these areas?
Generally not. I mean, the companies that own the land still own the land.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a whole different aspect of the huge land holding companies that lease the land to the coal companies.
So this would probably be during.
Yeah, this looks like definitely an active mine. Yeah, you can see the equipment.
I mean, this was a pointed mountaintop.
Yeah.
And now it's this. This is where, if you see it, it just really takes your gut. And this is just kind of a quick video of them digging. The next one coming up is the one with the slurry that really just hits me up at my heart and my gut. And the next one will give you an idea of where we're headed next, because we're going to talk about environmental and social impacts after this video. And I guess this would be some of the slurry going down the mountain.
Yeah.
And it's quite wide. It's not a thin trickle. It's not a creek. And at the end of this video, this part is the end of the video, but at the end of the section, you can see out in the distance that there is probably a larger body of water that this is going down into. And I want everybody to imagine if these were some of communities in the hollow or areas down there. That's what is kind of devastating too. So I guess then we should lead into what are the environmental impacts of mountaintop removal.
So it's, I mean, the environmental impacts they're manyfold, and there's everything from the the obvious, like there's no longer a mountain there, there's no longer a forest there. The streams that have been buried and just obliterated. The water still moves through, but instead of going down a natural stream bed, it's filtering through all this the spoil is what they call it, that's been dumped into the valley fill. And that leads to less obvious impacts to water quality, because as the water is flowing through what used to be solid rock and has now been broken up, minerals and elements have been exposed that weren't exposed previously. The water, so they're exposed to water and air, and that leads to chemical reactions that can result either in something that is pretty blatant, which is acid mine drainage. That's where you see water coming off the mountain. It's like orange, rust orange, color water shouldn't be. But there's also things that happen that aren't really visible, like selenium pollution, which selenium is a toxic chemical that is bioaccumulative. So as you go up the food chain, the concentrations kind of keep getting higher and higher, and it can result in fish kills and in genetic mutations. It can pretty much eradicate the life in a stream.
Well, that's what I was thinking too. As we talk about this, I know a lot of times we talk about people, but you're also killing off some vegetation, some of the natural wildlife that are across this path, and it's damaging to humans if it gets into their stream. So you're really hitting all the areas of life that are coming down off this mountain.
Exactly.
So it's common for them to just dump the slurry all the way down. This is not something they can contain.
Generally, slurry is kind of maintained behind a dam of some sort, which can fail with tragic consequences, as happened in Kentucky a while back, and kind of most famously in Buffalo Creek, West Virginia. There was a slurry dam failed, and it resulted in a horrible flood down Buffalo Creek that killed a bunch of people and was just horrible. So generally, those slurry is contained behind dams. It's not just allowed to flow into the rivers. They're certainly not supposed to.
And is that part of their reclamation, where their bond as well, that they should not do any further damage down the mountain?
Yeah, and that's there have been a lot of lawsuits and efforts to hold coal companies accountable for the water pollution, for the acid mine drainage, for other impacts.
And would you say that the lawsuits, would you say that they get anywhere in someone's lifetime?
I mean,
in general?
I remember when I was covering this for the Gazette, and we had some, amazing rulings come down from federal district judge Charles Hayden, and the rulings would come down, and we'd think, okay, this is it, we won, and then they get overturned on appeal, or Congress would try to rewrite the laws. So it's. They have had some very positive impacts. They've extracted a lot of money from coal companies that's gone to water treatment and other efforts to mitigate the damage, but they have not solved the problem.
So if I'm a coal company and I see the spoils coming at my area, my community, then they would try and do better water treatment plants. That would be probably the only way they could mitigate that. If I was moving to an area tomorrow and I see that coal mining on Mountaintop is still there, this is something that hasn't really been resolved, the after effects too much, even in the courts, like you said. And I know how the courts work. They go back and forth and back and forth. And it might be 2 or 3 persons' lifetime before a decision's made. And it might not be the one you want or need, but you're already long gone. You've either moved or unfortunately passed away. So the areas around, let's take, I guess, West Virginia, since we know West Virginia is completely in Appalachia, or even Western Virginia, or in that pocket, there's still active mountaintop removal going on. Maybe not as much as it used to. So are the towns nearby, are they being deserted? Are people still staying?
Some people are staying. I think if you look at census data, there's definitely been an outflow of population, and a decline. And part of what Appalachian Voices does is working to reverse that and help revitalize these communities and give them a more sustainable economic base. But yeah, and that it definitely has an impact. There's one story when Arch Coal bought the Dowtex mine back in I think it was the early 90s. There was a community there, and they decided the best way to deal with complaints from the community was to buy everyone out and just get rid of the community.
I thought you were going to say that. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, and there's actually a great quote. Let me see if I can find it real quick. So, let me see. I'm sorry. Yeah, so
and I'm not surprised either, by the way.
Yeah, but one Arch official put it like this: "Our philosophy is not to impact people, and if there are no people to impact, that is consistent with our philosophy." So they bought people out. And as part of the settlement or the buyout, they couldn't protest against mountaintop removal, mining anywhere. They couldn't relocate near another Arch operation.
This is incredible. Yeah. You're now impacting my First Amendment rights.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just because you don't want to deal with your extras from your business, I guess, your damage. That is just amazing. So I'm still a little bit in shock. I'm not surprised, but I can just see them now going. And when you first say it, they bought out a whole community. That's one thing. But then they gave them all these requirements. And I'm just totally amazed. And where was this? Was this Virginia, West Virginia?
West Virginia, Blair.
I'm a little shocked at that too, though. I won't lie, because I know some of the West Virginians I know up mid-state around the coal mines. I think they would have had some other words. But, what are you going to do if you have a family, if you have kids?
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. Well, for one thing, I think West Virginians have a connection to where they live that a lot of people don't understand. And so a lot of people wouldn't want to give up their property anyway.
It's been with them probably for ancestors when West Virginia was still Virginia, at least the land.
Exactly. But then the other aspect is that, once a coal mine starts nearby, your property values are going to plummet, because this gets into the kind of some of the community impact. But if you think about what's involved, some of the video you showed of the blasting, all the heavy equipment that's running, what people maybe don't realize that are further removed from it is that's a 24-hour-a-day operation.
Oh, you're right. I forgot. Yeah, you're right. And the bright lights, I forgot all about that as a kid. Yeah.
Yeah. So you got the bright lights, you got the loud noises, you got the blasting. The blasting is loud, but it also stirs up a lot of dust that ends up, just coating everything. And then not all that occasionally, huge rocks will fly off the mountain. And there have been tragic incidents where, those rocks have killed people. And rock probably, I mean, they're boulders in some instances. So.
But this is kind of amazing. So for those of you that think about it, if you're from Appalachia, this will be an easy thought. If you're not from Appalachia, but you know of it, and you've heard me speak of it, and many others speak of it as well. What Dan said is so true, that West Virginians do hold a value to their land that sometimes money can't buy. It is definitely a decision to sell. Is not always going to be money based for West Virginians. It's definitely going to be heartfelt. The ancestors here, the land has been there. I can tell you right now, I can give you exact directions, and I haven't been there since before COVID, of where my grandfather built the house for his new bride, because his new bride's father gave them a chunk of that land to do it. But that's the story. And it went on and on and on. It went back, for their ancestors, and it also moved forward for their descendants. So it's really, really tough. And when they built and they moved in, there's a coal mine near them that he actually worked at. The mountains are beautiful. They were part of their life. This is all they knew when they loved it. They didn't see a reason to leave and to move. And then if you imagine that one day the mountain is having coal company come in, and they plan on doing mountaintop removal. The weird thing, Dan, is that I just thought about is, so the area that I'm talking about with my grandfather, he did work the coal mines, and that was the traditional coal mine view that everybody thinks you're going down into the mine. They're used to that. They were okay with that. They maybe didn't love it, but again, it was paycheck, but they're used to it. I can't imagine what some of them thought when they see that the mountaintops that they used to look at in morning coffee or drive to work is now being removed. It's quite a different feeling.
Yeah, I would imagine. The other thing I noticed is that, there was a time when miners really, they were working hard to improve the lives of their family and make sure that, their children didn't have to go to the mines, that they had, alternatives. They, could go to send their kids to college or, and things. And then as the debate over mountaintop removal heated up, I think the union kind of dug in support of mountaintop removal mining, because that's where the jobs were. And I think union members also kind of dug in, and they really, they saw attacks on mountaintop removal as attacks on their livelihood and on their ability to make a living and on their ability to improve the lives of their family. And it really led to just some, just a lot of rancor and high emotions and things. It was, and I'm sure that's, still the case, but it was a really difficult situation.
And that's what makes this such a tricky subject. Controversy is more over the act. What happens, like you said, they didn't want to deal with the town, so they bought the town. The chemicals that are left behind, those are more the controversial. The tricky situation here is trying to get a paycheck, do a job, and then also understanding that as you do this job, you do have those environmental impacts. That's tricky on a person's soul and their mind. That's not an easy compromise there.
Yeah, and I think there's some, things that happen just psychologically that, there's a famous quote, it's hard to make a person understand the truth when their paycheck depends on them not understanding it.
Yeah.
So.
It is. It's an interesting job. We hear about dirty jobs and things like that. And what we mean by dirty jobs, we mean literally filthy dirty, not dirty as in bad or good. And even though they might not be in the mine going down that way, even the mountaintop removal still is not an easy job. You come away with a lot of the coal dust on you, a lot of the suit. So the job when you arrive and when you leave, you probably pretty much look the same as far as that is concerned. Well, I guess are there alternatives to get these icing layers out? Better alternatives, I should say.
Yeah, I'm not a mining engineer, so I kind of doubt it.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, and really, if you look at the impacts of burning coal and things, I think we're at a stage where the more coal we can leave in the ground and not burn, the better off we are, just as a society and for the future of the planet. But again, that I say that knowing that a lot of people's livelihoods still depend on pulling coal out of the ground and burning coal and
I would agree, and I do have some distant cousins that still do this. And my question to them is always, and the polite question, we have polite conversations about this, is always, I think that there needs to be another career for their kids because this is slowly dissipating. We see it in the 30s and 40s. You on the census, you can go down a census and see coal miner, coal miner, coal miner, coal miner. You don't see that as much now.
Well, yeah, and if you look at places where coal has receded, where it's not happening the way it used to, you have communities that used to have 100,000 people that now have like 10,000. Mm-hmm. And what's that do to a community?
That's true. They're moving. The jobs aren't there, so they're moving. And this is kind of this is a separate issue that I have trying to tackle with Appalachia, is to try to keep the brain trust within Appalachia and not have it migrate as it's done, especially the 40s, the 50s, the 60s as well, where people moved out. So do you feel in general, from your experience, that the laws and regulations that are governing mountaintop removal are, let's just say, okay? They're maybe not great, but
that's kind of tough to answer because I have been away from. My organization still deals with mountaintop removal, but I haven't been as deeply involved as I was when I worked at the Gazette. I know then they were not okay. I mean, I think the intent behind like the 1977 Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act was good. And there were things in there that, like I discussed, that reclaimed land was supposed to provide some sort of benefit for nearby communities. There's supposed to be economic development or some higher and better use, and that just never happened. It was always grass and wildlife.
Did I see this? I might have been dreaming, and forgive me for not fact checking this before. But did I see someone trying to put a baseball field or something on top of one? I might have been dreaming about that. I was like, how are people going to go all the way up that mountain to play a baseball game? But I was kind of amazed at, I guess, the creativity to try and pass and get that bond back.
Yeah, I mean, there have been a number of efforts. There have been prisons built. There have been, I'm trying to think.
Well, that would kind of be Appalachia's own Alcatraz, I guess.
Well, there was one prison in outside of Charleston that was built on a former mountaintop removal site, and it ran into issues with subsidence. So the foundation wasn't stable. So like doors wouldn't close.
Oh.
So you've got a prison where the doors won't lock because the foundation. Um, but I remember Ken Moore Jr. He's a reporter with he's co-founder of Mountain State Spotlight. He was a reporter with the Gazette when I worked there. He did some reporting in the late '90s, early 2000s, looking at what kind of economic development or any kind of development that had occurred on mountaintop removal land, and it was like 3% of the surface area. So it was, in the kind of clarion call that the coal companies always said was, we need more flat land in West Virginia. And it's like, well, you've done all these acres of flattened land and have done nothing with it.
Something I didn't ask you that I should have asked you from the very beginning, and I was thinking about how the company removed the town, and then what you just said that they're building prisons and things like that. Who actually owns a mountain that they can do this to?
So that a sizable chunk of West Virginia, probably, I think, and I didn't research this before I came, but I'm thinking it's like 80% of the land in West Virginia is owned by kind of absentee land holding companies. Some of them are forestry companies, some, just a variety of large corporations that are headquartered in Cincinnati or other places. And they lease the land to the coal companies to mine it. And then when they're done, it's owned by these people. And the land records are kind of a mess. So it can be difficult. Like we do some work in Southwest Virginia where we're trying to do economic development projects and things like that. And we've run into problems where we can't find out who owns the land, so we can't put a trail through.
That sounds interesting. That I mean, I'm not going to say that was planned, but it sounds like a heck of a mess because you've got to resolve that title.
Yeah.
To get back. Yeah.
Yeah, it gets even more complicated because they severed surface ownership from mineral ownership. So you can own the land, but you don't own the coal underneath.
And that's a good point. I don't know if a lot of people know this about Appalachia. I know several of my relatives in West Virginia have done this. So if you own your property, you can actually sell off below your property the mineral rights. You'll still own the land, but they own the mineral rights and they have access. And that is something that's been around for a while. But most people don't know that because when you go to buy a house or you buy property or a farm, almost anywhere in the country, you buy it and you don't think that you're selling something underneath of you and still living there and still owning a piece of it. But that, as Dan mentioned, I'm so glad you did. There are mineral rights that can be sold, and then you've got your land. And trying to combine those going through land records is interesting. I mentioned that specifically because I know that we also have a lot of genealogists that follow us, and that will be a nightmare for you guys trying to figure that out. That's going to be a tricky one. We talk about trying to find these ancient land records and hope and a prayer that they're in a Bible or something like that. But you're right, Dan. This is going to be tricky for future generations.
Yeah.
How do they transfer the land? And it's just amazing to me that out of state companies just go and buy up some mountains.
Yeah, and they, the tax rates they pay are a lot lower than, if you own a home and an acre of land, then you're paying a lot more for your acre than the landholder company is paying for any acre that it owns.
This is pretty interesting to think about that so again, if you go back to my example, I moved tomorrow to this town, beautiful mountains, and then next week a company comes in the mountain next to me and says, we're doing the mountaintop removal. There's just nothing you can do. It's going to get done. And I guess an interesting question for you would be, do you think mountaintop removal let's just take Appalachia. Do you think mountaintop removal in Appalachia will cease in our lifetime?
I think my gut is that it will. mostly because the demand for what's underneath the mountains is
Is pretty
going to,
much going. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, coal-fired power plants are closing left and right, and yeah, I don't think there's going to be the demand that would support. It's a huge capital investment to blow up a mountain.
Yeah.
I mean, the equipment is, these drag lines are, tens of millions of dollars. The electricity you need to run the drag lines and everything. I remember touring, it may have been Dowtex, back in the late 90s, and the foreman of the site said he actually had done the calculations to make sure that the coal that they were producing would actually generate more electricity than they were consuming.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that way. So I guess then maybe trying to stop mountaintop removal, this might be a instance where it comes to a natural conclusion.
Yeah, which is sad,
Yeah.
because there's been so much damage done, over this last, it started in the 70s, and really picked up in the 80s, and yeah, you just hate to think of everything that has happened as a result, and that.
And I know that I like to tend to focus, I should say, but I like to focus on West Virginia a lot. That's where my ancestors have come from. But this isn't just West Virginia we're talking about. This is parts of Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, I believe,
Yeah.
going up. So keep that in mind. And we've had this particular slide up so everybody could see different locations in the areas that mountaintop removal is already. It's either been there and left, continuing. So these are all mountaintops that will not come back, pretty much.
And I asked a colleague of mine to kind of look into, like, how many mountains have we lost, and the number is close to 870.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just an amazing number. And when you add in, like you mentioned, the cost, the capital to go in, they have to do more than one bond, but the equipment, the employees, the staff, the after effects, that's a lot of communities down that mountain. That is a lot of hollers.
Yeah. I mean, and the acreage is like, in kind of within Appalachia, you're talking about like more than 1.5 million acres that have been disturbed.
That's just crazy. Okay, well, let's bring it to, you have a couple questions. Let's take this back to a couple questions. And I hope everybody has learned a little bit more about mountaintop removal, what it is and why it's done, and what the after effects are, but mostly how it's impacting the environment and the people. Keep in mind that, Dan and I are still being respectful about this because we do understand that there are coal miners that have this job. So there's not an easy solution there to a question of should it stay, should it not. There are different reasons for it staying, and there are different reasons for it not continuing as well. So let's ask a couple of questions that you have here. Are there requirements as part of the recommendation to reduce the heavy metals to a safe or certain amount?
Yeah. So when you get a permit to mine, it will include discharge limits. And if you exceed those limits, then you can't get your bond released.
And it's a pretty large bond. It's not just a little couple dollars. From what I understand, it's a pretty large commitment bond.
Yeah. Well, and this is it's funny how many different issues there are that are involved that are all each on their own just very complex. But so there are different kinds of bonds you can do. There are, you can get surety bond, which is essentially an insurance company. You pay them, a certain amount, and then they cover the full amount of the bond. There's what's called self-bonding, which is pretty much just a coal company saying, "Trust us, we got it. We can afford to do this if it, Um, and then there are bond pools where there's like a state puts all the money into a pool and then it just uses it as needed. But what's clear is that the amount of bonding that is available to actually reclaim these mines is a fraction of what it would actually cost to reclaim.
It's not enough. It's not. It's throwing some grass seed.
Yeah, and as more and more coal companies are going bankrupt, it's becoming clearer and clearer that system isn't what it needs to be.
Working. Yeah. Let's take another. This is about the communities, and Kathy wanted to know how big were the communities they were buying.
I really only know of the one community that they bought out, like had a concerted effort to just buy out the entire community, and that's Blair. My recollection is that was like a community of 200, 250.
Oh my! I thought you were going to go way less. I was expecting you to say something like 40. Wow, that was a large buyout. And when we talk about that, we're talking about their history, their churches, their schools, their neighbors, because they're not all moving probably, together in a new community. So friendships and families. Wow. Oh, that's a good question, Kathy. And Kathy had a follow-up. I wonder if the people of the community were happy to move. And I think that's probably a tricky one, too. They didn't want to leave, but they didn't want to stay.
Yeah, I mean, they probably didn't want to stay with the blasting and the disturbance. But, again, people have just really deep familial connections. And, they grew up hunting and fishing on the mountains, and their parents and grandparents are buried there, and so I think they might have been relieved to be able to sell their house at a price that would let them buy a new house somewhere else, but I don't think anyone was particularly happy with the whole situation.
And then I think Aaron followed up with just a comment. Natural Resource Defense Council did an analysis and confirmed nearly 90% of mountaintop removals were not converted to the economic uses. So, and I would have to agree with Aaron too, that it is sad for those areas because those areas were probably struggling to begin with before mountaintop came in and became a player into this. This is a tough one. This is going to be one I don't think we have any really answers at the end of this webcast to say definitively this situation fixed something. This situation helps someone.
And that was kind of the whole idea of the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act, that it would allow companies to come in and do this very disruptive form of mining. But the compact, it was like a social compact that we'll do this, but we'll leave something better behind, that, something that will benefit the community. And, I would be surprised if the number wasn't, 90% seems low to me. I would think it would be more like 95.
That's sad. That's amazing. That's sad. Well, I tell you what, let's finish it this way then. So I'm going to drop the link to Appalachian Voices. And could you tell us a little bit about what the organization is that you work for? What's their mission?
Yeah, well, it's kind of multifaceted. A lot of what we do is dealing with coal impacts, trying to make sure that mines are reclaimed the way they're supposed to be, that the ongoing damage is resolved somehow, the water quality issues, and things like that. We're also working very hard, and this work is kind of concentrated in the 7 coal producing counties in Southwest Virginia, but working to build kind of a new economy in these areas, so that there is sustainable work available that can keep people there, that can keep them prosperous, and bring the communities back more where they were. We're also we do work to prevent unnecessary fossil fuel and infrastructure like the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, the Mountain Valley Pipeline. We're working to try to stop those. We actually worked with, the coalition we were part of succeeded with the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and we're working very hard to stop Mountain Valley. And then we also do a lot of work around what we call energy democracy, which is giving people more input into how their utilities are run, where the electricity comes from, making sure that that rates are affordable, that there are programs for energy efficiency, that you don't get your electricity cut off when it's 20 below zero, things like that. So it's a broad, multifaceted approach to kind of improving the lives of people in Appalachia.
Well, I think it's great. And I know I would love to have you come back and have your organization come back and talk about the jobs you're creating, because that is one of my biggest points of changing the narrative of Appalachia. Everybody seems to feel that it is desperately poor. And I beg to differ. I think poor is global. It's not just national, it's global. But I also think changing the narrative on Appalachia is keeping that brain trust, finding jobs, quality jobs for people, not menial jobs for people, as well as in Appalachia. And Appalachians are hard workers. Look at these coal miners.
Yeah.
They definitely are. One quick question before I let you go.
Mm-hmm.
Evelyn said Blair. Was it the same Blair Mountain War around 1920s? Was that Blair, West Virginia?
Yeah, that. Well, I'm trying to. My geography is not going to be what it needs to be. I think Blair was.
It was down south. Both of them were down south. Yeah. So I think it's general area.
Yeah. Now there was, and there was a proposal to mine Blair Mountain. Gosh, I can't. And now I'm blanking on what happened to it. This was after I was at the Gazette.
Was that to try and mine something that West Virginians considered untouchable?
Yeah. And it was on the National Register of Historic Places.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a movie called Matewan about the Blair Mountain mine wars and stuff. It's definitely worth watching.
Well, I think that's a good way to binge tonight, find a movie. But I really appreciate you coming and educating us, because even though I know just enough about it to be able to describe it, you really amazed us with some of the stories about the reclamation. But also, I don't think I'm going to get past this whole community being built out, bought out. Excuse me. I don't think I'm going to get past that. But thank you, Dan. I appreciate you joining us today, and I appreciate everybody that's joining us live. And if you're watching this after the fact, I appreciate you as well. Keep in mind that this month that we're focusing solely on coal mining in Appalachia. And coming up this Saturday, we have a very special guest, a guest that grew up in Itman, West Virginia, a company coal town. The company brought in and built the houses. And he grew up there as a child, but also he's a lifelong coal miner for the mine there. And he's going to share his dad's stories and his stories growing up as well. And then coming next week, we have a professor, Dr. McCauley from the West Virginia University, that's going to explain to us exactly what black lung is, and also talk to us a little bit about coal dust versus coal mine dust. There's a silica question in there. And then coming back, we also are going to talk with ACLC. This is a special nonprofit group that works for black lung works for miners that have black lung and mine safety. And then, of course, throughout the month, we have lots of video shorts to share with you about interesting things about coal miners, their work hours, what they eat. Have you guys had a pepperoni roll yet? If you haven't, stay with us. And thanks again, Dan. I appreciate it. And thanks to everybody. We'll see you next time.